Hi, my name is Sam Deegan, and welcome to the Zapier for HighLevel Masterclass. This is the first video in a whole series I'm going to be creating that has the intention of helping you build very cool stuff using Zapier and HighLevel. Okay, so in this video, we're going to be talking about kind of like the abstract theory a little bit about how Zapier works so that you can get a conceptual understanding of how these automations work. And ultimately, the point is, to help you kind of build kind of an intuitive feel for how you can just kind of start whipping these up, right? So once you actually get it, once you understand how it works, it's going to be very easy for you to start building really cool stuff by yourself. So, funnily enough, at least when I first started, there wasn't a whole lot of resources that went over stuff like this. And so I think that this will be helpful, maybe not for somebody who's already super in HighLevel. If you already know Zapier, I'm not sure if this is going to add more to you, right? But if you don't quite grasp Zapier yet, right? Maybe you're brand new to HighLevel. This is going to be a very useful resource for you to start kind of putting the pieces together and understanding exactly how you can start building these really cool automations that ultimately save you a bunch of time. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about who I am. So I'm the co-founder of Physical AI. Here's like kind of the short version. Basically what we do is we've built this cool little widget that pops open in your HighLevel and allows you to interact directly with ChatGPT so that you can have AI written copy or you can write copy with AI rather while you're on your website, right? While you're so that you can write email lead nurture sequences and all other sorts of really cool stuff. And if you want to know more about that, I'm sure I'll put like a link down below. Or you can just go to like my Facebook group or something and you'll see some more information on there pinned to the top of the group. Anyway, I was previously the CEO of a marketing agency specifically for gyms, and we were using HighLevel a lot for our clients. And we were also selling SaaS and stuff like that. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to actually implementing HighLevel as a part of a product in a larger agency, as well as ultimately kind of having to build a bunch of stuff on Zapier and Integromat and all that, which ultimately made me an automations wizard. Okay. And I also got a whole lot of experience because back in 2021-ish, I started doing stuff. I was working in the real estate space, and I was doing automation consulting for real estate investors who wanted to start using HighLevel and really like getting like really crazy performance out of it, making it do crazy things. And so I learned a whole lot doing all that as well. So that's all to say that you're learning from someone who knows what he's talking about. And after we kind of go over the theory here, I'm going to be building with you a bunch of different automations. Okay, and I'm going to show you, or I'll tell you then exactly how you can get your hands on them. Okay. All right, so we kind of already covered this. The goal of the lecture here is to teach high levelers the principles of automation so that you guys can start thinking and programming logic, right? As soon as you can do that, then it just, boom, it becomes super intuitive. You know exactly how to build something when you're confronted with the problem. That's ultimately where I want to get you, or at least help get you started in that direction. The second thing is I'm going to teach, my second goal is to teach high levelers how to build powerful automations that ultimately will help you guys automate your work, save time, right? So that you can start doing things that are more important in your business rather than stupid admin tasks, right? That can be easily automated. All right. So as I said previously, this whole section will be theory. Okay. In the following videos, I'm going to be demonstrating exactly how Zapier works, or I'm going to be actually in Zapier. I'm going to talk to you about how Zapier works in this video. At a more abstract level, but we'll have hands-on stuff in the next video. They'll be coming out here soon as well. All right. But before I continue, I just have one question. Have you ever heard of causality, right? Because ultimately, that is how automations work. Okay, there's a cause and then there's an effect. In this case, there's a trigger and then there's an action, right? And so automations is basically just a series of triggers and actions. And so there are two types of automations. There's intra software automations and multi-software automations. Okay. So when it comes to intra software automations, there are things like GoHighLevel, right? Monday or Slack, right? Where you can, within a software, you can program workflows. So, hey, when this happens in this software, then do this in this software, right? So these are examples of intra software automations. And you can kind of see here on the Monday, right? It says when this happens, then do this, right? Reflecting that structure of the trigger and the action, right? Similar thing with the workflow builder. It says add new trigger, add your first action. And then once again, when it comes to the Slack builder, it works in a similar way. There's a trigger and then there's steps, action step, workflow steps, which are actions that happen after that trigger happens. Okay. Now, multi-software automations are a little bit different, right? Instead of just working within one software, we're now going to try to create the same kind of trigger and action sequences between different softwares. Okay. And so you can see here on the left, there's an initiating software. And then there's some kind of data that's sent from the initiating software through to a processing module, we can think of it as. And that processing module then sends data to some receiving software. Okay. And so, for instance, we could say that, let's say every single time that a customer is marked as 1 in HighLevel, I want to create a new contact or a new, like a project in my project manager. Let's say ClickUp, right? So I create some kind of trigger within the software. It shoots out a webhook. That webhook's caught by a processing module. Ooh, what's that? An example would be Zapier, right? Which is what we're talking about today. And then Zapier goes ahead, takes that, and then it says, okay, the trigger is catching this webhook. The second step, all right, is actually creating an object within ClickUp, let's say, right? And so when it does that, it catches it, and then it communicates data over to the receiving software, which in this case is ClickUp, and then that triggers ClickUp to go ahead and create a new project. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what the actual processing module does. The first thing is it's receiving input somehow. It can then manipulate or filter the data, right? So we can have it, perform operations for example, let's say that I wanted in Zapier, let's say I shot a number in from HighLevel, and caught it in Zapier, and I wanted to multiply that. I can manipulate the data by multiplying the data or the number that was sent from HighLevel over to Zapier. I know that's like a little bit abstract, but bear with me. Okay, you can also filter data, meaning that let's say that I only want, let's say that there's 10 possible values that could be sent from HighLevel over to Zapier. This is super abstract, I'm sorry. And I have a filter in Zapier and says, only continue with the rest of the automation if the value that's sent from HighLevel is 1. Okay, now let's just, for the sake of an example here, let's say that value is held within a custom field. So maybe you can start to kind of understand it a little bit more, right? This is just an example, remember. And so I could say, only continue if the value is 1. So everything else that gets sent to this automation now just immediately gets filtered out. So that's just an example of how a processing module can filter data out. It can also request, right? And subsequently receive data back from other sources. So there are operations, and I'll be getting more into this a little bit later, but there are operations called get operations, where let's say in Zapier, you want to get information from another software. And what you do is in Zapier, you create a module, says, get a project, get the information related to a project in ClickUp, let's say. It then pulls that information in. Okay, that would be an example of it requesting and receiving. And that's because it's it's saying, hey, ClickUp, I need this information. And then ClickUp's like, okay, cool, here you go. And then boom, Zapier now has access to the information that it requested from this other source, which in this case would be ClickUp. It has the ability to format process data in accordance to the API requirements of a receiving software. So we'll talk a little bit about what an API is here in a second. But basically, sometimes different softwares have to be communicated to in a certain way in order to understand what you're trying to tell them to do. So, let's say for the sake of example that, we have an automation that's being triggered by an appointment or by like some event happening in your Google Calendar, right? And then we want to translate that over to HighLevel, let's say. We want to bring that information into HighLevel. and let's just say hypothetically that HighLevel has like, it needs the data for the date and time to be formatted in a particular way, right? So one cool thing about Zapier and about these different processing modules, right? And I'll talk to you some more about what other types of things are processing modules here in a second. But one cool thing about them is that they have the ability to take data and format it in a certain way so that they can be communicated to other software. So that's another very cool aspect of them. And then ultimately, it also has the ability to output, said formatted processed data to another software, right? So send information over somewhere else. Okay. Now this is a little bit heady, all right, but we're going to make it. So what exactly is a processing module, right? As we know that Zapier can be a processing module. What else could it be? Well, it could be code as well. And there are other things called middlewares. So Zapier is a middleware. So is Integromat, and so is Pabbly. Okay. And basically, a processing module usually breaks down to some form of middleware or it's code. Now, because we're not all coders, right? Middlewares are basically a no-code solution typically to connecting these different softwares and allowing you to create these multi-software automations. Okay, so as I said before, Zapier, Pabbly, Integromat, another one would be Pipedream, and there are a few others as well. Yep, so pretty much said everything here. So software that simplifies the process of constructing your own processing sequence through low-code or no-code means. That's pretty much what a middleware is. So when I say processing sequence here, just know that I'm talking about some kind of a workflow automation, right, of some sort. Now let's break down exactly how software works, because at the end of the day, all software kind of breaks down to databases that are presented to you with a user interface. And so what are databases consisted of? They're consisted of different objects, right? And so these objects all have different relationships to one another. So I want to kind of break down exactly what's happening here. This is like a little screenshot of Monday, okay? And I want to break down exactly what we're looking at here and how, this is ultimately constituted of objects, okay? So you see here the first arrow is pointing to the client board, okay? This is a board object, and the name of it is client board, okay? And then you can see that there's this group right here, okay? And this group is tentative clients. Now, this group itself is another type of object, and it's associated with the board, okay? So it's saying that in this board, which is client board, there is tentative clients as a group, okay? So ultimately, the group is related to the board in some form or fashion. And if you look here on the left, you can see that there are multiple boards, okay? And all these boards exist within a workspace. So this workspace has these boards. So the boards are related to the workspace. These groups are related to the board, and ultimately these records here that are within these groups are related to the group. So there's all these different objects, okay? And then they all have interrelationships with one another. And so ultimately the user interface consists of basically a display of the relationships that exist within a backend database. Okay, it's like, kind of complicated. You're like, Sam, you're telling me about databases. I don't really care about that. I'm telling you that you want to start to understand what you're looking at here, because it's going to help you create really great automations when you understand the underlying kind of structure of how it really is working on the back end. It's going to inform you and it's going to help you out a lot, right? So ultimately, when it comes to automations, we got to talk to them, right? But how do we do that? One option is screaming, right? It's not super effective. We could also worship the database. Doesn't really work, right? That's not very effective for getting it to do what we want it to do. So how do we really actually communicate with them? We communicate with them via APIs. So what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's basically, you can kind of think about it like a set of rules, okay, that the software has. It says, you have to talk to me this way and this way and this way, right? And when you talk to me this way, I'll do this. And if you talk to me this way, I'll do this thing or give you this thing, okay? And so it's ultimately breaks down as the way that we're communicating with these softwares. Okay, now there are two, and when it comes to what you need to know, okay, to start, building stuff with Zapier, you just think that there are two major categories of APIs. There are event-driven APIs, and then there are REST APIs. So event-driven APIs are APIs that are triggered by some action happening within a software. So we have the ability to create effectively event-driven APIs, in HighLevel. Okay. And so I'll just go to this next slide where I detail it. So an event-driven API, it means there's an automatically initiated communication between the software and your automation, right? So just to go back to the example I was talking about, let's say we can program in a high-level workflow. We can say, hey, when this happens, then shoot a webhook, right? So when we're speaking about an event-driven API, we're usually talking about some kind of webhook that's shot from a software when some particular thing happens, okay? We could talk a little bit about webhooks here. So basically, a webhook is a parcel of data, okay? So if you've ever tinkered with Zapier at all, and tinkered with HighLevel and Zapier, and you've tried to shoot a webhook from HighLevel to Zapier, it gets caught. And then what you find is if you look at what's contained in that data, it'll have all the information related to a particular contact. Okay, and so that webhook's data package, right, contains all the contact information for the contact in HighLevel. Now, what's actually in the package will vary depending on what software you're using and what exactly you're asking for. But I'm just trying to give you an example here. So yeah, and you can see here that in this particular instance, so a webhook contains information regarding the particular record that triggered the webhook event, and communication is sent at the time of some predetermined triggering event. So whenever some triggering event happens, it's shooting out a webhook, right, that contains information. Typically, that webhook will contain the information regarding the particular record in the database that triggered the webhook event. Okay, hopefully that was understandable. I will just give you a single example here. So let's say that the software is HighLevel, okay, and we set up a workflow in HighLevel, and we say anytime that a customer replies, send a webhook, okay? So anytime a customer replies, it's going to shoot a webhook out to some predetermined URL. So basically the way that it boils down in HighLevel is, whenever you're setting up a webhook step in the workflow, it asks you to put a URL there for it to send it to. And then if we were using Zapier, right, which is a processing module, the webhook will ultimately get sent to the processing module. Okay. And the webhook's information will contain all the contact information related to the particular record in HighLevel, the person in HighLevel who actually replied in this particular instance. Okay. It says, and then it says down here, at the time of the occurrence of some predetermined trigger event. So basically, as I said before, that trigger event is a customer replying. Okay, hopefully that was not too confusing. Now, how does a REST API work? So REST API, these are manually initiated communications between your automation and the software. So we are having to tell the software what we want from it. Nothing's happening automatically. There's not a trigger that's shooting something out to us. We're actually having to go to the software and ask for something, right? Or ask it to do something, right? And so within a REST API, there are typically 4 types of interactions that you can have with it, right? You can post, okay? You can put, you can get, or you can delete. So to post something usually means to create a new record, okay? Or create a new something. To put means to update an existing record in the database, right? To get is to request information pertaining to a particular record, and to delete is to delete a record. Okay, and so you can kind of see here, this is what it would look like when you're usually interacting with some API, right? So regardless of what API you're using, or which one of the 4 rather of these types of interactions you're using, there's a request and there's a response. Okay, so let's say the processing module is initiating this. Zapier is basically trying to get information from HighLevel, let's say. So Zapier says, hey, give me all the contact information related to the record that has this phone number. Okay, and so it passes the phone number along in the request, and then the software says, okay, so it finds the record that has that phone number and then passes it back to Zapier in a response. Now, even if I was creating something, it would still pass a response. So when I have let's say I'm asking it to create a new contact within HighLevel. I say, hey, create this contact, right? Boom. it will send me a response saying, hey, we've created this contact. It'll give a confirmation. If I say delete this, right, it's going to give me a confirmation saying delete it, right? So there's always some kind of back and forth, right? And then even if it doesn't work, it'll send a response back. So if we send something there and something we totally messed it up, we improperly formatted the phone number, let's say, we were trying to get a contact, it'll say there was an error, right? There's always some type of response that's coming back. And so at HighLevel, you could kind of think about, when we're talking about this processing module and we're talking about an automation, many times it ends up breaking down into this type of structure, right? There's some kind of trigger that's happening in some software. Now that may be a webhook from HighLevel that's triggering the automation. Another example, it doesn't even have to be an event-driven webhook or like an event-driven API that triggers the software sometimes, or the processing module, like the particular automation. Sometimes you can set it up such that the trigger is a certain amount of time. So every, hour, trigger this, right? Somehow, somewhere, there's some trigger that's triggering this automation. And then within the processing module, let's say, this is just an example. Not all automations look like this, by the way. But let's say that there was some kind of get function like we were talking about earlier. Let's say, for the sake of this example, the initiating software was one HighLevel account, but we have two HighLevel accounts, and we need to sync them both together. So when something happens in the first HighLevel account, it shoots a webhook to us, sends us the phone number, right, of the contact. We then, in the processing module, say, hey, can you... to this miscellaneous software here, hey, can you send me your contact, your record information that contains this phone number? So it goes ahead, sends it over, gets the response back, right? And then from the information that it got from the second HighLevel account, there's some data manipulation function. Let's say that, we wanted to take the most recent calendar appointment time and then format it somehow so that it was in a different format so that ultimately we could send that to a third software. Maybe it's like an external booking calendar, software or something, right? This is just an example, right? But when it comes to automations that you're creating, ultimately they kind of break down into this type of format. There's a trigger, there's a series of different things that happen, and ultimately when you're constructing an automation, you're just chaining these things along. They can go on for as long as you want. Okay, so you can have as many functions as you want in this automation, right? Now, maybe subject to breaking, right? But ultimately, this is kind of how it's structured. This is an example of how one may be structured. All right, so in the next video, we will be going over exactly how Zapier works. We're gonna dive in and go through all the different triggers, right, and some of the different actions that are built into Zapier. And then after that, we're gonna start building stuff that we're gonna find useful within useful applications of Zapier for HighLevel. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you found this valuable. And with that being said, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.